Education is preparation for reparations.
So let me say thank you to Esther, to Jacqueline, to Belle for organising a marvellous event. You got me here from Nairobi in some nice weather, playing golf and having a good time planning a conference, so you must have done something. Also, there are two amazing Kenyans here, Kimatai Bosek, who's one of the leading human rights lawyers, who is in the audience this morning, and also Sister Yvonne, who's a parliamentary representative who's Kenyan-Swiss. So you can see just about the importance of having conferences like this take place. So my background, very, very quickly, is that my father was from Sierra Leone, my mother was English. The ancestry of my family can be traced back to Georgia. They escaped the Civil War and went to Nova Scotia. From Nova Scotia, they came to London in 1873 and back to Freetown again, and then back to London in 1945 on a troop ship. So to say that we are part of that enslaved people's story, and I didn't know some of this background before I went to the US as a guest of Angela Davis and people like that with the Society of Black Lawyers in 1988. And so I rediscovered some of my roots and from some of the civil rights activists there, and involvement with the Society of Black Lawyers has brought me round full circle. So any of you who are thinking of even dreaming of going to Kenya, make sure you get there for the Bandung conference, and those of you who don't know your history, you should know what Bandung means, but it's the first Pan-African Congress in 1955 for the liberation movements of African and Asian people in Indonesia. Malcolm X was there, and he met Piamagama Pinto, who's the father of the Mau Mau movement in Kenya. They became good friends, and at the height of the insurgency in Kenya, Malcolm X visited Kenya for 2 weeks. So there's some history that we all have to get. I actually want to take a slight right turn on looking at reparations for enslavement and take you into a place which is partly inhabited by lawyers but partly inhabited by activists. If you go to northeastern, western Kenya, you will find anybody who has a cup of tea, you're likely to find that at least the best part of the teas comes from Kenya. What they don't tell you is that British settlers before 1920 took some of the best farmland in Kenya and they still got it. 200,000 acres in Kericho and Bomet County held by Unilever, which doesn't pay tax in Kenya, doesn't pay tax in Britain, and it basically is part of the post-colonial struggle which has impoverished Africa. And if you go there, you'll see one side of the road which is tea plantations as far as the eye can see. On the other side, you generally see the results of impoverishment of smallholding farmers. Del Monte, the same. Kukuzi, the same. And so all over the continent, you will see the remnants of, the very deep remnants of colonial legacies, not just in Mali or Ivory Coast or Togo or South Africa or Namibia, all over the continent. Duchy of Lancaster, I think the royal family still owns chunks of Kenya and chunks of Tanzania. So the next time you go and look at an elephant in a wildlife reserve which is supposedly conservation, look who owns the land, and look who should have owned the land. So some of the interviews I've done in Kenya have been with people who are the descendants of Mau Mau veterans, the descendants of Maasai and indigenous peoples who've had their land taken and they're squatters in their own land. So when we're looking at reparations, there is a historical precedent. The American government gave the Japanese Americans compensation for being detained in California during the years after Pearl Harbor. Precedent. In Namibia, the German government awarded the Herero and Gama people who were assassinated in the first genocide, first of the modern genocides of European powers, post-colonial. And those reparations figures, I think, are 4.3 billion euros. Whether it ever gets there is another matter. But those indigenous people still face persecution in both Namibia to some extent and in Botswana. And the problem is, and I see this firsthand in Kenya, the enslavement of the mind continues. Where do the leaders of most African countries go? They go to international schools taught by British teachers straight out of Harrow and Yorkshire. And is it surprising then that many of the African and Caribbean leaders still have ignorance in their head because they're given a narrative which is the narrative of the hunter, not the hunted? And so one of the things we have to do is decolonize the mind, because in a sense, even if you get huge amounts of reparations, where's it going to go? It's going to go in some chateau on the banks of Geneva, and it's going to go to send some privileged children to even more privileged schools to learn more about the way in which they are privileged, and the rest of the communities, whether it's in French-speaking Anglophone Africa, doesn't know their own history. And so one of the things I think we have to guard against in this is to make sure that the biggest job we have to do is probably the education of our own. Because unless you educate your own, and you can see it every day of the week with lottery winners. I mean, really, do we want to become a lot of lottery winners that then are poor again tomorrow? Because that's exactly what will happen. You have to have a certain amount of knowledge to empower yourself for that future. But I'm an optimist. I'm near the end of my time, but I can say that if you put the legal knowledge together and on the continent, and you do one thing, which is activities, because leaving with this thought, when we had demonstrations with Bell led in London outside Unilever headquarters in 2020, in July, at the height of COVID, we held a demonstration in Unilever headquarters in Kericho County. What can happen is, though, you can push the law. You occupy the land. Who the hell needs to go and file a motion first? Occupy the land, pick the damn tea, take what is yours, and then when they come to arrest you, and you will get arrested, well, that's fine. You then challenge that, because you cannot steal what is yours.
Yes, very powerful ending. You cannot steal what is yours. Thank you, Peter, Herbert, for that opening contribution.
Education is preparation for reparations.